Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or at least it's evening where I am right now. In fact, I usually don't record when it's dark out because as I've brought up in many videos before, I have a problem with talking at night because I know my neighbor's next door, and I know she could probably hear me. This video is brought to you by my neighbor and the fact that she is gone. For not like long term. She's off somewhere. She isn't here tonight, which means I can record whatever I want this evening, even though I know I'm only going to record this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first episode of what is technically the second season, although we're going to do things a bit differently this time around. The second season of the Transformers Lore Podcast with your host, Commander Radix. So what's up, Commander Radix? What's going on here? What is this Transformers Lore Podcast? Well, where do I begin? Let's start with Season 1. Season 1 of the Transformers Lore Podcast was a podcast that I did about Transformers lore, but it was essentially made to talk about topics in Transformers lore that there was no visual element to make it worth a video. Think of like Beast Wars Uprising, or the Star Wars Transformers story, which is told only through toy bios. That sort of idea. I couldn't make normal Transformers lore videos for them, so I had to make a podcast to talk about what happened in it. Which is weird because I got one person commenting on those videos once saying, this is just lazy content. And I said, if you listen to my episodes where I explain why this is happening, the only way I can make video topics on this is by doing podcasts. And the person replied something along the lines of, no it isn't, you're just lazy. So, you know, that's back in 2016. The Primus Prime 22 community in 2016 wasn't the best. We're doing pretty good here in 2020, all things considered. But the way I do Transformers lore has changed since then, so stuff like Beast Wars Uprising, I think that will be able to be covered in a proper Transformers lore video. Especially because I'm getting to the point where I don't care what pictures I have up as long as they're like vaguely tangentially related, and I don't care how long that image is up on the screen for the current Transformers lore series. The Transformers Lore Podcast Season 2, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be just talking off the cuff about some concepts in Transformers lore. This is like the opportunity for me to talk about how I feel about Transformers lore, because anywhere from 90 to 70, to be generous, % of my Transformers lore videos are very cold, are very me writing a script that's meant to be as objective as possible and just read that script. You really don't hear much of my thoughts, feelings, and what have you on Transformers lore. I do have the Transformers Talk series where I just do commentary subjects on specific Transformers stuff. This one might be a little bit more lore focused, but also for smaller things that could very well become Transformers Talk videos. I'll talk about it on this podcast. So that's what separates Season 2 from Season 1. Season 1 was strictly covering lore topics in a sort of objective manner. Season 2 is just me talking about Transformers lore, and it's me in the hot seat. There's a gradient, a spectrum of Commander Radix content that sort of range from me being cold and reading off a script to me being personal and just talking about how I feel about things. On the far end of the cold spectrum, you have Transformers lore, where I just take myself out entirely and just kind of push through it as like, you know, Transformers lore is what gets me the views, and that's why it's here. And then like the warmest you get is over into the Commander's Cabin podcast, where if you find yourself enjoying the Transformers Lore podcast, consider checking out the Commander's Cabin podcast, which is me talking about anything but Transformers in a more personal podcast fashion. So I always considered, I don't want to get too much into this stuff because I don't want this to turn into the Commander's Cabin podcast, but I've always thought that as large as my channel gets, my viewership, the amount of people who I have watching me really is only the size of how much views I get on my Commander's Cabin podcast videos, because that's the ultimate core cult Commander Radix content. But back to Transformers lore. Now, there's always been a room for about 2 podcasts on this channel. in recent years, I don't even know if it's even been years, in the past year maybe, it's been the Lazy Koalas podcast and the Commander's Cabin podcast. Well, long story short, the Lazy Koalas podcast ain't coming back. So we have room for a new podcast, and I always sort of wanted to try the Transformers Lore podcast again from a different angle, and that's what we're going to be doing here today. So, yeah, this is where you're going to hear my opinions, you're going to hear my thoughts, you have me in the hot seat. Commander Radix talks about all this stuff, but how does he feel about this stuff? You know, that's something that doesn't really come out much, with the exception of like some big overarching concepts that I talk about in my Transformers Talk videos. So, the main point I want to talk about here today is what I think is the largest, or was. It isn't so much the largest problem now because of the Shroud, and I really hate talking about the Shroud. I don't want to be known as the guy who talks about the Shroud all the time. Believe you me, I do not want to be associated with the Shroud. But, will I ever talk about anything after the Shroud on this podcast? I doubt it. So let's just assume for the entirety of this podcast that I'm talking before the Shroud. I really want to get the Shroud stuff out of the way because I hate talking about the Shroud and constantly referencing the Shroud. So, unless I say otherwise, we're going to be talking about the multiverse lore of Transformers on this channel. Not on this channel, in this podcast. Not just this episode, but all episodes going forward. We probably, unless I say otherwise later on down the road, we probably aren't going to deal too much with post-Shroud stuff, like, you know, the current IDW comics, or the War for Cybertron trilogy, or Cyberverse, or the Bumblebee movie. We probably won't talk too much about that stuff. This is probably going to be dealing with the pre-Shroud multiversal lore stuff in the Union Cluster. Because the Union Cluster is like kind of outside of the multiverse, but then it gets brought back into the multiverse. Whatever. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to be talking about what I think is, or was before the Shroud, the largest issue, the largest glaring flaw in Transformers lore. And that is the availability of content. Now, what do I mean by that? What do you mean by that, Radix? What do you mean the availability of content? Well, I mean, oh, you like Star Wars? Well, here's 6 movies that... 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Here's 11 movies that everyone knows about. And then, if you want to get into the more deeper stuff, there's novels, there's comics, they're all over the place. Bada bing, bada boom. It's very simple. The expanded universe is easily at your fingertips. Oh, you like the Elder Scrolls? Or if you want to learn about the lore, here's the games. And frankly, all you need to know is from the games, and just read the books that are inside the games. I guess there is a trilogy, a duology of novels that take place in the Elder Scrolls universe that aren't in the games that you can read. Let's say you like DC, you like DC Comics. Well, there's a line of available comics, and if you want to start putting things together, there are some encyclopedia reference books and what have you. Now let's say you like Transformers. And you're like, oh, I like Transformers, where here's all the TV shows, here's all the main retail comics. So here's all the TV shows, and here's all the comics published by... in the IDW, the first IDW continuity, the Dreamwave continuity, and the Marvel continuity, the main 3 Transformers comic lines. If you read all that and watch all that, and let's throw in the Michael Bay movies too, if you watch those, read all those comics and stuff, you still are, if you go to the Commander Radix channel with all that knowledge under your belt and click on like the Transformers lore videos on Commander Radix, just looking up Transformers lore on the internet, you're gonna be lost. You're gonna be like, what is going on? What's a multiversal singularity? I never heard of that before. What's with all these cluster names? What's going on here? What's a shroud? What's a universe war? You're telling me the Unicron Singularity Crisis is the reason why there are Generation 1 animation errors? And, this is what I think is the largest problem with Transformers lore, and that is the deep lore actually is deep. Here's the thing, message to Hasbro, just because it's deep lore doesn't mean the only way to find it is by combing through eBay pages trying to find issue number 53 of the Hasbro Transformers Collectors Club magazine that carries all this lost lore knowledge. Like, that's ridiculous to me. Easily the largest issue with Transformers lore is the availability of the actual lore content. The most important stuff in Transformers lore, the stuff that puts everything together, for the most part, can be found in the pages of BotCon exclusive comics and Collectors Club exclusive magazines. Plus, a Facebook page. A Q&A Facebook page. And there's also some information done in a corporate Q&A. Like, Hasbro used to have their annual Q&A where they took questions from specific websites, and some of their questions there answer a lot about Transformers lore that nobody really knows about. You know, what we know about quantum events and how quantum events work come almost purely from a Hasbro Q&A done with websites. That's weird. That should not be our source of lore. I take issue with this because you want people to know about the lore, especially when it's something very careful. Like, Transformers lore is unique. I take inspiration from other lore YouTube channels and lore websites, non-Transformers lore stuff, but it's very hard to talk about Transformers lore and follow their model when Transformers is a very unique multiverse. It's a very unique lore. Most fictional universes have one solid, cohesive maybe not, what is meant to be one solid, cohesive universe, and that's pretty much it. Or, if they have a multiverse, there's still a focus point, a focus universe. Transformers is unique in that it has multiple universes going on, and the lore, you can't really ignore. You can ignore like some minor universes, like the toy bio of Desert Action Brawl or whatever, that only takes place in its own continuity. Yeah, you can ignore that, but for the most part, you need to be knowledgeable in all the stuff going on to be able to put the picture together with the deep lore stuff, with Ask Vector Prime and all that are crucial to understanding Transformers lore. But it's so hard to find that information. The most readily available source from the difficult sources I've mentioned before is the Facebook page of Ask Vector Prime. The problem is, Ask Vector Prime is incomprehensible to people who don't have the background knowledge to properly read Ask Vector Prime. It's like, I want to learn about the Jewish religion, where here's the Talmud. You know, good luck parsing through this by yourself without any help. But a huge chunk of it comes from BotCon exclusive comics. The seeds for Transformers lore, as we know it or knew it, depending on if we want to talk about the Shroud or not, the seeds start to get planted in 3H's little text stories in comics, which start out at the beginning of the BotCon convention. So if you want to get like the first breadcrumbs into the deeper lore, it starts with like some of the earliest BotCons, convention exclusives. Oh, you weren't at the convention in 2004? Well, I guess you're just gonna miss out on like the fundamental, like what starts off this deep multiverse lore stuff. You're gonna miss out about the Covenant and the Shockeract, and you're gonna miss about the Veteran, and you're gonna miss out you're gonna miss the fact that like how Beast Machines works. You're gonna miss the fact that like all these Cybertronians lost their sparks, but the Autobots and Decepticons are still walking around during the time of Beast Machines. You're gonna miss the fact that Hot Rod is like leading a resistance against Beast Megatron, who has taken over the planet, and then as the BotCons continue, and you don't go to those BotCons, and you don't find these rare exclusive comics that are official, that are canon. You're gonna miss the part where they explain how Primus was tricking the Quintessons into making the Transformers in the G1 cartoon universe. You're gonna miss that whole deal. You're gonna miss how Primus planned out this whole techno-organic reformatting of Cybertron from the beginning. You're gonna miss how the Oracle is Primus. You're gonna miss all this stuff. And then as that goes on, it eventually marches up into the Universe War. And it's like, well, you're going to miss all this multiversal singular stuff. And you're going to miss out this major cosmological war that's like the last point in the timeline of the G1 cartoon universe. And is going to like pick up some leftover pieces from like the Robots in Disguise cartoon, the first one, weirdly enough. And like some Beast Wars and Beast Machines epilogue stuff. And then if you miss that, at that point, they transition from BotCon exclusive content, which they still do when BotCon was going on, official BotCon exclusive stuff that were canon. This is when Transformers Timelines comes in, and Timelines is where we introduce Shattered Glass and all this stuff. And a lot of people think, oh, Shattered Glass, that's where the Autobots are bad and the Decepticons are good. Shattered Glass was part of this like multi-part saga of connecting the pieces of Nexus Prime, and it stars Cliffjumper from the Classics universe, an alternate future of the Marvel Transformers universe, stumbling through into the Shattered Glass universe as a result of some chaos that happened during the Unicron Singularity Crisis, aka Transformers Cybertron. Like, that's what Shattered Glass is. Shattered Glass is a multiversal conspiracy, is what Shattered Glass is. But people, because people don't read that stuff, and because people don't see this stuff in the wider context, it's like, oh, that's where the Autobots are bad and the Decepticons are good. And they ignore the fact, like, when they invaded the Classics universe, and when they caused the Shroud and all this stuff. And this whole Nexus Prime arc going on in the BotCon exclusive timeline stuff. Meanwhile, around the same time, Fun Publications is putting out, at this point, the Hasbro Transformers official Transformers Collectors Club forums, where, you have to pay an annual, is it annual or monthly? I always never remember. You have to pay a fee, and then you get exclusive toys, but you also get the exclusive magazine that's like 70 issues long. And in this exclusive magazine, we're just going to drop bits and pieces of like really important lore here and there. And we're just going to continue to develop this multiversal story and like the understanding of the wider multiverse. And it's not even like you can like ignore that stuff and say it doesn't affect the other continuity stuff. Hayato Sakamoto and Naoto Tsushima heavily reference this stuff in their Japanese stuff. In the Japanese manga and stuff. And some IDW, it expands far, it expands way too far for it to be ignored entirely. But I really fault, Transformer fans, most Transformers fans don't even know the lore of Transformers. Their perception of what Transformers is, they could be Transformers fans all their lives and really big Transformers fans, but because they don't have access to this information that is like weirdly gate-kept, they don't know the full scale of Transformers lore, and so their conception of it is it's incorrect, and it leads to misconceptions that I actively try to fight by taking all this information and putting it up in my Transformers lore series. But then you get people in the comments thinking like, no, this isn't true. Primus didn't make the Transformers in the G1 universe. The Quintessons did. And it's like, you didn't read Universe Featuring the Wreckers, did you? And it's like, I can't blame you, because these are like really hard to find. Of course you wouldn't know about this stuff. But it just leads to a cycle of me like, let me tell you about the real lore of Transformers, and everyone looks at me like I'm insane because nobody has access to this stuff. It's what's the word? Mind-boggling. The Transformers Wiki. And I have a feeling a lot of these podcast episodes are going to have a little segment about me railing on the Transformers Wiki. Usually, to get this deep lore stuff, you would go to a wiki if it was locked away behind all this stuff. The Transformers Wiki is not a normal wiki. It does not operate like a normal wiki at all. It's the goal of the Transformers wiki is to say, haha, Transformers sure is crazy, isn't it? It sure is weird. It sure is it sure is silly. And it's meant to be organized for casual fans. You can tell by the way they break down the headings of their sections that it's supposed to be done by casual fan. It's supposed to be for casual fans. The Transformers wiki tends to actively avoid the actual Transformers lore because they don't want you to look at Transformers as a... It sounds silly, but like they don't want you to look at Transformers through a serious lens. Try to understand what Transformers lore is. They want to sort of poke fun at Transformers. And yeah, the people who run it are fans, but they don't want to... To the people who run the Transformers wiki, Transformers is not supposed to have lore. And so they don't try to acknowledge it. They try to... If they acknowledge it, they try to disconnect it from everything as much as possible and try to leave away the conclusions you can draw from the lore from like their actual articles. The Transformers wiki makes a lot of weird decisions. I'm like, this is entering like this isn't just weird territory. This is factually incorrect territory at this point. I point to how they break down the timeline for the Michael Bay universe and Bumblebee movie. That section is... Those pages are just wrong. There's no better way to talk about it than... There's no better word to use than wrong. But because the TF Wiki is the Transformers Wiki, everyone flocks to it. And it's easy to get like down a rabbit hole with the TF Wiki because, haha, the captions are funny. By the way, personal opinion here, I never thought a single caption on the Transformers Wiki was funny. Whenever I hear someone say the Transformers wiki captions are funny, I'm like, where are they funny? Are they funny because they're funny, or do you think they're funny just because they're not a serious caption and you're in your condition to think that there should be serious captions on wikis? But yeah, everyone flocks to the wiki because it's the only wiki, and they consume Transformers information through the lens the Transformers wiki wants you to view the information, which is from a very specific point of view. The Transformers wiki originated like sort of as a internal group between a certain select group of people, that they were just fans talking about like Transformer toys and stuff, and eventually they started a little wiki, and then it grew out into the Transformers wiki as we know it. But there's still that very central group of people who run the middle of it, who are in the middle of it, who run everything, and they have their specific interpretation of Transformers, how they want to view Transformers, and that does not include taking the lore seriously, which makes people who care about the lore, like yours truly, and try to spread information about the lore, it makes our jobs a little bit more difficult. So yeah, largest flaw with Transformers lore, the lore is hidden. The real deep lore stuff is like hidden away through gate-kept stories, and the one source of information that's supposed to be bringing this information to a wider public tries to avoid talking about it. So that's the source. That's the ultimate source of where all my headaches on Transformers lore come from. I can see we've only been going for just under 25 minutes, and I've already finished my main topic. Let me see if I can think of a second one. Oh, actually, keeping on this topic, it's not just the deep lore stuff. There's also stuff that I would not consider major lore that is still hard to find. For example, I was looking through how much of Transformers is like actually collected that can actually be bought and consumed. Specifically looking at comics and manga. Now recently, there's been 3 volumes released of a series called Transformers the Manga. And Transformers the Manga tries to translate... I don't own any copies of the manga yet. I don't know what translation they used. The canon translation, if they said Cybertrons and Destrons, that's not the canon translation. But I think it says Autobots and Decepticons, so we might be good on that front. But what really disappoints me with Transformers the manga is people will get it and think, yeah, this is all the manga from Transformers. It doesn't collect a lot of manga. It doesn't collect a lot of stories from the Japanese G1 cartoon timeline. And now some, like, you can get away with saying, yeah, you probably didn't have to collect this. But it would still have been nice to have. Like, for example, something that comes to mind is Kiss Players. Kiss Players and Teletran 15 Go Go are actually really important pieces for understanding the Japanese timeline. But I can understand why they were left out, because, you know, they sort of have their own different atmosphere to them. And there already is a collected version of those books, just not translated into English yet. But one thing that I don't understand why it was left out was the G2, the Transformers G2 storyline. A manga, and I think there was story pages. Basically, the continuation of Battlestars? Is it Battlestars? No, Operation Combination. They are the continuation of Transformers Operation Combination, and they sort of form the end of... Like, I see what the Transformers the manga collections are trying to do. They're trying to go from, like, collect those story pages and manga stuff that came out during that time frame. But, it ends at around G2. And they left out G2. Like, there's a straight line from Operation Combination to G2, and they just didn't collect it. Which, is a problem, because, like, if there was a time to collect G2, it would have been in Transformers the Manga Volume 3. Now that Transformers the Manga has come out and it's finished, there goes all hopes of G2 ever being collected and translated. Like, oh boy, that's not good. And because I speak Japanese, I've always wanted to provide more translations for Japanese exclusive content. That is important to understand the lore. The Cloud stuff is something I plan on translating as soon as I have time. The Transformers Legends manga was something I was planning on translating until, I thought when Epilogue was released that the Legends manga was over, but Sakamoto just keeps releasing manga and keeps releasing more manga chapters, which is cool and all, but because, like, his style of writing means that every 5 panels there will be something revealed that drastically alters how you understood the Japanese timeline, I really can't sit down and translate anything. I really can't sit down and start making lore videos about the Japanese timeline until Sakamoto is finished, because every 5 panels some earth-shattering revelation happens. And I love it. I love his writing, but from an archivist's perspective, from a translator's perspective, from a lore keeper's perspective, I have to stand by and wait until he's done doing his thing there. Speaking of G2, did you know that the entirety of Transformers Generation 2, the Marvel comic, has not been collected yet? Transformers Generation 2 was left out of the IDW Transformers Classics collections, and when Tie-In Books collected Generation 2, they left out Generation 2 number 0. Which means you didn't collect the whole thing, now did you? Now, Generation 2 number 0 and the rest of Generation 2 are collected in Transformers The Definitive G1 Collection, which is a headache of a compilation of Transformers comics. It's an initiative by some British company to publish every Generation 1 Transformers comic. But they're publishing them and collecting them in such a weird order. It's going to be 80 volumes of collected comics, but they're all in some strange order that it doesn't... Like, they're grouping them by concept. Like, hey, these are all these stories where Shockwave and the Dinobots fought. So let's put those early arcs from the Marvel comics, some UK tie-ins, and then Transformers Maximum Dinobots. Disclaimer, I don't know if this is, like, if that's the exact... constitution of a specific volume. I'm just giving a theoretical example here. But, like, it results in a weird continuity mishmashing that doesn't work. And, like, the volumes are released in a weird order. Like, oh, here's volume 56. And can't wait for next week when volume 30 comes out. It's just so strange. So, like, yeah, Generation 2 number 0 is collected in that. And personally, I believe that you cannot read the Generation 2 comic without the context from the G.I. Joe comic that leads into Generation 2. And I think the Generation 2 G.I. Joe comics are collected in the definitive G1 collection. So, yeah, technically, it's all collected in the definitive G1 collection. It's just in a UK exclusive in a series that just combines everything together in a weird order that doesn't make any sense. So really, it's not a step in the right direction. You know, you can say, well, technically it's all collected in the definitive G1 collection, and it's like, yeah, but at this point, the Bible was probably collected in the definitive G1 collection, except all the books are misarranged, and Revelations comes first and Genesis comes last. Because I was looking like, I really want to have some trade paperback copies, or maybe get the hardcover editions of Transformers Classics, and then get up the hardcover versions of Regeneration 1, put them all beside themselves in a shelf, and then like, oh, this would look nice. But I'm like, what about Generation 2, though? I'm like, oh, they just haven't collected Generation 2. The closest you can get to Generation 2 are the last 2 volumes in the Titans books collections. But even then, you're missing the G.I. Joe lead up to it, and even worse, you're missing Generation 2 number 0, which is referenced. Just because it's called number 0 doesn't mean that nothing happens in it. It is referenced in the story. Kind of crucial for Grimlock's character, I think. And I think does Alignment have a physical release? I don't know. It's technically fan fiction that's been canonized, but it is canon, but it's also fan fiction. It's in a very weird position. So I don't know if there are physical copies of Alignment available for sale. But like, because it's technically fan fiction, I'm sure there's no problem with printing it yourself and then binding up in whatever you want to bind. I've been experimenting with binding books recently. I recently have ordered the Calamus Mythos, the Decennium Compendium 2008, to be collected and published. Not like released, published, but printed. Printed's the word I'm looking for. To be printed and mailed over to me. So it shouldn't be that hard to make your own custom printing of Transformers Alignment. But Generation 2, though, that needs to be collected. What's up with that? Kiss Players and Teletran 15 Go 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 has been collected, but it's out of print. It's very hard to find. And the largest tragedy is that Kiss Players Position, which is a radio drama, it doesn't look like Kiss Players Position was saved anywhere. It looks like it was, oh, what happened to Position? Something weird happened to Position where, like, it was either like, I can't remember. It was like some situation where you will not be able to find Kiss Player's Position. Like, that is just not a thing that can be found, even though it's crucial for the Generation 1 cartoon timeline in Japan. The Japanese timeline. I shouldn't say in Japan because, like, you can read it anywhere, right? And it's brought up in Ask Victor Prime, so it isn't purely a Japanese timeline. This is gonna bother me. Let me look up what happened to Kiss Player's Position. And what's bad is Kiss Player's Position is like the good part of Kiss Players, but it's gone. Yeah, none of the Kiss Player's Position shows were ever collected onto a CD. That's not good. In fact, I'm wondering where the TF Wiki got their source to be able to provide descriptions of what happens in each episode. Because, if it never aired... Well, it did air, but if it was never collected onto CD, how did some TF Wiki admin or TF Wiki editor figure out what happened in Position? Which is, like, Kiss Players, the radio drama, I guess you'd call it Season 1, the pre-Kiss Players Position, you can find that on Nico Nico Doga. Like, you can find the original radio drama. That's available. If it hasn't been taken down yet. I really need to download it just in case it gets taken down. Because once that Nico Nico Doga video is taken down, there goes Transformers Kiss Players. There's a lost, I think it was collected on CD though. So I guess if I spent $1,000 I could find it again. But Position? That's gone. That was never collected on CD unless you were there recording the radio while it was happening, which I guarantee you nobody in that time frame was doing that. I don't think there's any record besides the TF Wiki summaries of what happened in Kiss Player's position, which is a shame because, like I said, TF Wiki isn't the best source for stuff. TF was like, alas, it was never collected on CD. Well, can you give me a source about where you got these descriptions of what happened in each episode? What are you talking about? So Kiss Player's position, another example of Transformers content that's just wasn't collected anywhere and is now lost to time. You know, what's going to happen when people can't find Generation 2 number 0? I guess this is me speaking as like someone who's really historically minded. My major was history and education in college, so, you know, I am all about saving things for archives. Like, that is like my life purpose, to assemble as much archival stuff as I can. And as a big fan of Transformers, I want everything archived. And when I see that something isn't collected, ooh, I have a problem with that. The UK Marvel stories, I don't believe have ever been fully collected, which is a shame because they're good. The most brightest shining hope was Transformers Classics UK that was being published by IDW Publishing, but James Roberts was the head of it, and James Roberts really was focused on More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light, and like it looked like Transformers Classics UK was just a passion side project he was doing, except he gradually lost passion over time, and then ultimately, once his time at IDW was done, he was like, yeah, I'm just not going to finish Classics UK. And it's like, wow, okay, thanks James Roberts, you really helped us out here. I don't know if it's Titan Books. If it's not Titan Books, it's someone else, but someone did collect the UK stories. I don't know if they collected all of it, and I'm pretty sure they're in black and white, and I know like half of Marvel UK is already in black and white, but like I think they collected the ones that were already in color and just made them black and white for their printing, which, you know, I'd like to preserve the color, you know. Oh, what else is not preserved? There's a lot of story pages from the Japanese timeline that aren't really preserved anywhere. I would be interested in a book that collects all the pack-in comics that came in like the Unicron trilogy toys. I would actually be interested in that for the pack-in mangas for Japanese toys. Transformers Legends needs to be archived. And yeah, they have a website that carries the main chapters, but like in the individual toys, they were their own chapters that impacted the story and advanced the characters. And you can only find scans of those. I'm like, yeah, that really needs to be in an archive. Those need to be collected. The entire Sakamoto saga needs to be collected into one bigger work so it can be referenced. What else hasn't been collected? Has Dreamwave, has the Generation 1 Dreamwave comic been completely collected yet? I'm not sure. Transformers Timelines needs to be collected. The entire Hasbro Collectors Club magazine needs to be collected because that's the deep lore right there, and if that deep lore stuff isn't collected, isn't preserved and released for a wider audience, I guess it doesn't matter now that the Shroud happened, but that's lore waiting to be lost right there. I would be interested in a printed version of Ask Vector Prime in all the Facebook pages now that I think about it. Oh, I'm sure there's more that's not collected. Probably some Hasbro Universe stuff weren't collected. I have a feeling that there are some like last minute things from the Hasbro universe in IDW that were just not collected. I just can't think of anything off the top of my head. Universe War and Universe featuring the records would be nice to see a public available release. Ultimately, what I'm also really in favor of is a proper Transformers lore reference book. Star Wars gets reference books all the time. Marvel and DC get reference books every now and then. Transformers really only has a handful of reference books. One, there's Simon Furman's Ultimate Guide, which is about the closest we've gotten to a proper reference book. But at the time when the Ultimate Guide came out, there really wasn't that much lore to discuss. The Ultimate Guide sort of came out while Transformers lore was really blossoming into its own thing. And it kind of figures that Simon Furman's writing it, since Simon Furman was the mastermind of this whole multiverse stuff. There's also the Spark Almanac, and the Spark Almanac is a great book. It's filled to the brim with new lore for the animated universe, but again, it's confined to the animated universe with some exceptions. There's like some Ask Victor Prime segments within the book that stretch out to more multiversal stuff. Sideways shows up in it, but it's pretty much animated centric. Although it was a big source for multiverse stuff before the Facebook version of Ask Victor Prime came out. And then there are other reference books that are pretty much just like out-of-universe reference books. I'm talking about the toys and stuff like that. But I would love to write a proper reference book for Transformers. You know, one that actually talks about all the deep lore. That would be nice to have. If I had the opportunity to write it, well, that would be great. I would write it for free, to be honest, just to make sure that Transformers lore is available to be read, to be referenced. I would love the opportunity to do that. I wonder how Jim Sorensen got to write the Spark Almanac. Well, really, I think he started off with the Arc guidebooks of like animation, like talking about like some animation cells, some old notes from like storyboards and stuff like that. I wonder how Jim Sorensen was able to create those licensed books, because he's a fan. I don't know if Jim Sorensen likes me. I know Jim Sorensen used to be interested in my stuff to a certain degree. He did leave comments every now and then, but at the same time, I saw him in the same threads where people were talking crap about me and like the Allspark forums and stuff like that. I'm like, how do you really feel, Jim? What's going on here? See, that's the thing about me and the rest of the Transformers community, or like the Transformers lore community, and people knowledgeable about Transformers stuff. For some reason, they hate me, and I don't know why. Well, it's probably because I disagree with their interpretation of some stuff, because this mostly is the same TF Wiki circle I'm talking about, and just the way one side wants to look at Transformers as a silly little thing, and while the other is really interested in the lore and wants to talk about the lore, you know, I guess they aren't really willing to. That doesn't sit well with them. I think it's a shame for how long Beast Wars 2nd and Beast Wars Neo were left unavailable to an English-speaking audience. Now, I had watched Beast Wars Neo and Beast Wars 2nd before, because I speak Japanese, so I could watch those. They were available not in that high quality. When Karyudo fan subs came in with this high quality resolution videos and good translations, although I do take issue with do they translate Cybertron and Destron as Maxwell and Predacon in that? I can't remember what they did. It irks me when I see English translations leave Cybertron and Destron in there, when canonically in the English-speaking world they are Autobots and Decepticons. Ask Vector Prime references the Japanese timeline and calls them Autobots and Decepticons, and calls Convoy Optimus Prime and stuff like that. But it was amazing when they released that high definition copies of Beast Wars 2nd and Beast Wars Neo. That was cool. And I'm glad they were able to release it. I think Karyudo fansubs, Beast Wars Reborn Chapter 4 seemed to have been lost forever. I remember scouring the internet for everything I could find to try to find Beast Wars Reborn Chapter 4. And then just like overnight, Karyudo fansubs comes out and was like, hey, we translated Beast Wars Reborn Chapter 4. And I'm like, where did you find Beast Wars Reborn Chapter 4? Like, where did you find the high quality copies of Beast Wars 2nd and Beast Wars Neo? Like, Karyudo fansubs are wizards. They can conjure up lost content from the ether. It's impressive. I love those dudes. It's kind of unfortunate, as you can tell, they want to translate more stuff, but some people have pigeonholed them into the Transformers category, but when you work miracles like that, releasing what were previously thought to be lost forever content, that's some wizard stuff right there. But at least we have like PDFs and scans of like the Legends chapters that are missing, and of like the G2 story pages and all of that. The real loss is Kiss Player's position. Ain't nobody finding Kiss Player's position again, unless Karyudo fan subs all of a sudden does some sort of necromantic ritual and pulls it out of the ground. But that's real lost Transformers lore. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say on the subject of my largest issue with Transformers lore, and that, of course, is the availability of the content, whether it be hidden away in a strange place, whether it be that it just hasn't been collected yet, and who knows if it will ever be collected, whether it be if it's something that really should be brought to the English-speaking audience, whether it be something that was just a radio show that explained deep Transformers lore stuff and was just never put on CD. And whether it be like popular fandom sources of information that aren't really meant to be sources of information. Those are my deepest problems with Transformers lore. This episode's shorter than I thought it was going to be, but whatever. Thank you all so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. Check out my social media, specifically the Commander Radix Discord server and the Commander Radix Tumblr account. That's where I dwell on the internet. I post most updates there, so yeah, get her done. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening in on the first episode of the Transformers Lore Podcast. Do you have a sort of concept or topic you want me to talk about in future episodes? Because I don't know how regular this series will be, because I don't know how regularly I'm going to have ideas. Feel free to leave your own ideas in the comment section below. And yeah, that's going to wrap this episode up. And again, thank you so much for listening, ladies and gentlemen.